Hello and welcome to this lecture here at Queen Mary's University London. To all of you here, to those watching at Leeds Beckett and Wolverhampton universities, and to those watching on YouTube, hi, I'm Matt Dempsey, the AES London section representative. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to engage on this important topic. Please feel free to ask questions at any time. They will be sent here to be asked at the end of the lecture. For those here in the room, please wait until the microphone reaches you before asking your questions. Those listening on the stream will be able to hear. Now, to introduce our speaker tonight, Grace Brooks is a PhD student in the School of Information Studies at McGill University in Montreal, Quebec. Her PhD research uses conceptual models from within knowledge management and gender studies to explore the development and use of tacit knowledge by audio engineers. Grace's academic background is in applied mathematics and biomedicine. She completed a master's degree in biomedical research at Universitat Pompeu Fabra. I probably pronounced that completely wrong.
I do too.
In 2015, where she studied stochastic delayed dynamics, and an undergraduate in physics and physiology at McGill in 2012. She is also an active experimental musician and has been working full-time as a front-of-house engineer for most of the last 6 years. Grace, please take it away.
Great. That's a really, I wish I hadn't written such a long introduction to myself. So hello. I think I have some of your names already, but no one on the stream, obviously. I guess I'd like to start by thanking Matt and the rest of the London student section for inviting me here. This evening I'm going to be talking to you about discrimination, diversity, and inclusion in audio engineering. And I'm going to try to bring perspectives from management, gender studies, and audio together in order to understand the current state of diversity in audio. I'll also be talking about a collaborative project that I'm a research assistant on, which is a project with the University of Lethbridge in Alberta, Canada, the Audio Engineering Society's Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And that's that. So I guess who here is an Audio Engineering Society member? Okay, so most of you know then that the AES is the largest professional organization worldwide, professional audio organization worldwide, and it connects over 12,000 members with opportunities in industry, education, and research within audio. The Audio Engineering Society's Diversity and Inclusion Committee's stated goal is to ensure diversity in the AES worldwide and the audio industry as a whole by improving accessibility, welcoming diverse genres, embracing emergent audio fields and research, and radiating inclusiveness to all races, gender identities, physical abilities, ages, and nationalities. And I'm involved in the Diversity and Inclusion Committee as the head of the data working group. So I guess I've given this talk a couple of times, and mostly it was students who were present before, but who here is a student in audio? Great. And then who here is currently working as an audio engineer? Great. And who is working in music as opposed to other types of audio? Okay, cool. Great. So I'm going to start with some definitions, which seems kind of pedantic, but at least then we'll be on the same page with respect to these concepts. So diversity is the condition of having or being composed of differing elements, so especially the inclusion of different groups of people, such as people of different races or cultures in a group or organization. Inclusivity would be including everyone, especially allowing and accommodating people who have historically been excluded, for example, because of race, gender, sexuality, or level of ability. And I'm also going to include an organizational definition, which might apply to, for example, a company or a group such as the AES. So within an organization, ensuring that members feel simultaneously that they belong in the organization and that their individual uniqueness is respected. And then the third definition is discrimination. So that's to discriminate, the act, practice, or instance of discriminating categorically, or the unjust or prejudicial treatment of a different category of people. So treating someone based on how you categorize them rather than they themselves, who they are. So as audio professionals, why should we care about diversity, especially as audio professionals who may not feel that they that you yourselves have experienced discrimination. So basically, I argue that we should care because it's been shown over and over again that diverse groups, specifically gender diverse groups, are more creative. They enjoy their work more. They engage more deeply with workplace culture than non-diverse groups. So to start off with, current peer-reviewed research has shown that there's a strong positive correlation between gender diversity and creativity in organizations, so in businesses specifically. And it's also been shown that successful diversity and equality management is associated with higher productivity, lower organizational turnover, so people leave less often, higher group performance, and higher member satisfaction within organizations. And also, when people perceive that there's discrimination, whether it's discrimination against themselves or discrimination against their colleagues, it reduces their job satisfaction, their altruistic sort of pro-social member engagement in their workplace, and also their commitment to their place of work. Yeah. And also, so within volunteer organizations, there's also a little bit of research specifically into volunteer organizations, so such as the AS. Two main factors have been shown to determine participant engagement inside and outside of meetings in volunteer organizations. One of those is the perceived opportunity for influence. So basically, do you think you'll be able to get anything you want to get done in this volunteer organization? And then the other one is inclusivity, so perceived inclusivity, how inclusive you consider the volunteer organization to be. Diversity has been shown to be so important to organizational health that this approach, diversity management, has been adopted sort of very widely. Diversity management is a style of management that aims to promote greater inclusion of employees from different backgrounds in an organization structure. And it focuses on equality through difference rather than equality through sameness. So mobilizing employees' difference for the benefit of the organization. So the benefits of this management approach are increased organizational resilience, so the capacity to respond to unexpected challenges as an organization, adaptiveness, creativity, as I mentioned before, and innovation. So, I mean, if we think about audio, this is like an industry that is super characterized by wearing many hats, so holding many different roles. And there's a really clear need to adapt to changing economic conditions at this time, as well as technical paradigms that change very rapidly, and applications that change quite rapidly as well. So for example, the rise of video game sound. So, I mean, for me, it seems really clear that all of these payoffs in terms of resilience and innovation would be great for audio to be able to mobilize. So, yeah. So what do we know about the state of diversity in audio at this time? Actually, I should backtrack. I'm going to talk a lot about gender diversity today, but I will mention ethnic and racial diversity. There just really isn't very much information about it at this point. So that's where my focus is for now. So to leap right in, the first data point we have on diversity in audio comes from 1980. Pamela Peterson published an article showing that looking at the percentage of women engineers, and she showed that in 1950, 1.2% of audio engineers were women. By 1976, this had ballooned to a whopping 1.6%. That's not very many. The first source of this magic 5% of audio engineers are women number seems to be from 1995. This is according to Leslie Gastonbird, who just published a book, Women in Audio. So that number was sort of circulated by different groups such as Women's Audio Mission and Sound Girls, and became like the ubiquitous number that people quote in terms of gender diversity in audio. A more data-backed number from 2016 comes from Mathew's study of the AES, which showed that 7% of AES members are women. And so another really interesting study is this one by Smith from 2018, where they looked at 600 sort of like a sample of 600 representative Billboard Top 100 tracks from the years 2012 to 2017. And they looked at who was credited as artists, songwriters, and producers on these 600 tracks. And they showed that only 2% of the producers credited on the tracks were women. So 96% of songs did not involve a female producer at all. And then of these producers, half of them were also artists. So only 1% of them were dedicated audio, like music producers. Yeah. And we also know that these numbers are reflected by the numbers of people participating at the AES conventions. So these are the yearly conferences and conventions of the AES. A recent study by a Young's group from of the participants in the AES conferences between 2012 and 2016 showed that women and non-binary people represented 9.09 and 0.11% of participants during that time, with a clear bias towards applied topics such as, I don't know, sound reinforcement, rather than theoretical topics such as maybe acoustics or circuit design. And that hasn't changed in the couple of years since. They have also data that goes all the way up to 2018, which shows exactly the same thing, and in fact a slight reduction in the number of women participating in the AES conventions. Women and non-binary people are also even more disproportionately underrepresented in high-profile scenarios. So for example, the invited paper, workshop, keynote categories, with 2% of invited papers being presented by women. And that actually has gone down in the 2 years since. When you add the next 2 years in, you get 1.6% rather than 2%. So I guess one thing that we have to keep in mind with looking at this stuff is that the AES doesn't represent all audio engineers. So for example, Sound Girls is a group that has 7,000 members. 70% of them are women. There's actually a lot of guys in that group as well, because it has some great resources. And so that's 4,900 women in total, as compared to if you look at 7% of women in the AES, that's 840 women. That's really not very many. So in order to understand the position of women in audio, we need to understand also, we need numbers that are not just associated with the AES. Yeah. So we also know very little about other intersecting identity factors. So for example, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, trans and queer identity, level of education or disability within audio. So there's this one study into music technology students, so it's peripheral but related, where they showed that in the UK, music technology degrees have a significantly higher representation of Black and minority students than traditional music degrees. So that's one thing. And that also traditional music degrees admit a greater proportion of students with higher polar quintiles, which is an aggregate measure of education-based education and social class. So it's like a couple different measures smashed into one. Then the national average in the UK, where music technology degrees show the inverse relationship. But again, this is about music technology students. It's not specific to just audio engineering or production, although there's obviously a significant overlap. And then also, going back to that 600 tracks study, of the 651 producers identified in that study, so there were, I think, 13 women producers identified in total. 2 of them are women from minority groups. So if you look at 2 out of 651, that's a very small number of women from underrepresented racial or ethnic groups. And that's basically all the data that I have been able to find up to this point, and I've talked to a lot of people about it. So we really don't know very much about these other factors within audio. So why did things get this way? What is going on? I'm going to kind of run through a couple of possible culprits. Certainly, it's a very multifaceted issue, and I'm sure that there are many other possible reasons why audio is the way it is at this moment. But one explanation for the lack of gender diversity in audio can be attributed to underlying views and attitudes from industry. So this is from a recent study of the attitudes of audio engineering professionals, employers of audio engineers, and audio engineering students. And this was published in the Journal of the AES this year. And what is being shown here is they asked this question: how suitable would you consider a man or a woman for this role within audio? So technical roles, educational roles, for example, professors, or managerial roles. So secretary is sort of the example that they give for that. And they show that you can see here within technical roles, men are rated like much higher than women. And interestingly, women rated women as less suitable for technical roles than did men. So that's an interesting thing. But these findings reflect a very deeply naturalized idea of technology and technological roles as things that men can take on, but women can't. Women were actually rated as more suitable for managerial and educational roles in this case. Yeah. So some of these underlying assumptions may be changing. In the second part of this study, they looked at how competent participants in the study rated male and female audio engineers. So they asked this question where they're like, okay, they have this blurb about the audio engineer, and then they say extremely competent, very competent, competent, fairly competent, not at all competent. And then they asked different people to answer this question with either this woman or this guy. And they found significantly different results for audio engineering students versus employers or employees. I mean, it would have been great if they could include like a sound clip when they do this thing, because it's like, okay, but it does evaluate their snap judgment of like, okay, who's going to be more suitable for this role. But so they found that students rated women as more suitable than did employees or employers, and that students rated men as less suitable than did employees or employers. So that shows that attitudes towards men and women in audio are generationally mediated, and that the next generation of audio engineers may not share these sort of preconceptions to the same extent. Yeah. Okay, so, and then another thing. So as authors like Diane Marie Smith, who is the author of Decibels, Gender and Power in Sound Engineering for Popular Music in New Zealand, and Louise Meintjes, who's the author of Sound of Africa, Making Music Zulu in a South African Studio, have shown, sound technology has been discursively constructed as deeply linked with issues of exercising power. So the capacity or ability to direct or influence the behavior of others or the course of events. As many of you probably know, the role of the audio engineer is actually a very powerful one. You have the capacity to, for example, help musicians realize their best possible performance. You can design a speaker that then gets used at a political event to carry sound to many people. Or you can tell musicians to get out of the control room while you choose some takes that you're going to listen to with them. So these are all mobilizing power in the service of doing your job. And this woman, Bodil Sandstrom, wrote this work, 11 Women Mix Engineers and the Power of Sound, where she shows how claiming the power to act in audio really depends on mastering certain technical tools. Without the space or the capacity to master those technical tools, you can't direct or influence the behavior of others or the course of events in audio. So historically, the tools used to work in audio have required a great deal of capital to access, which has made them inaccessible to women and other minority groups within the industry. So you would think with the rise of really accessible digital audio workstations and other digital tools that maybe this would change things. But this has not been the case. If you look at work by Adam Patrick Bell, he wrote an article in 2015, DAW Democracy, the Dearth of Diversity in Playing the Studio. And he shows that even following the appearance of cheap, easy to access digital audio workstations, there's still a persistent lack of diversity in using the studio as an instrument. So this might be related. This may be related to how audio and music technology is associated implicitly with masculinity. So as Armstrong writes, I'm going to read this out because I thought it was a really nice summation of different work on this. So there are numerous parallels between the ideological construction of technology as a masculine domain and the construction of music composition. Both are historically and socially constructed along similar lines with their focus on technical knowledge, expertise, rationality, and mental logic, attributes supposedly characterizing men and masculinity. In relation to music composition, this ideology is reproduced by linking creativity to the mind. So the mind has been considered fundamental to creativity, reinforcing the mind-body dualism that acts as a means of excluding women, creating an ideological separation between the intellectual purity of the masculine mind and the messy and controllable female body. So, for women working in this domain, fitting in often not only requires them to adopt an identity that does not call attention to their femininity, but also to adapt to masculine ways of working in a digital culture that privileges male ways of knowing. And that's also Armstrong. And this gendering of music technology and ideas around music technology starts quite early. So for example, one study from 2008 showed that among students between ages 15 to 19, when they answered the question, do you feel confident using music technology for composing? 90% of the boys said yes. Just over half of the girls, just under half of the girls said yes. So the boys were almost twice as likely to say yes to that question already at that age. And there's some really interesting research by Østergaard and de Grave into the experiences of sound artists and musicians. So again, this is peripheral to audio, but related to the overall culture around music technology. And they show how the aesthetics of certain type of technical music are also associated with masculinity. So for example, we have this quotation from a woman who they interviewed who makes sort of noise music, and she says that most people who don't know me personally think that I'm a man, probably because my work is very raw, noisy, and digital, and usually that kind of aesthetic is perceived as masculine. And this association between technological prowess and masculinity obviously doesn't just affect women. So in this same paper, they show examples where men also chafe against assumptions of technological competency. So this is from a sound artist who they interviewed. So where he points out that when people engage with his music, he's assumed to be technically advanced, angry and opinionated, and serious, when in fact he's often joking about all of these three things in his work. And then he directly says that he thinks these remarks are gendered. And then he points out frustration at men trying to engage him in knowledge battles, where they show that they have the best niche knowledge. And I feel like probably anyone who's worked in audio has experienced that at some point, regardless of your gender. Posturing around technology. So I guess another thing that I don't have a slide for, but I think about a lot with respect to how audio is not very diverse, is that it's a very competitive field. And so audio engineers are often protective of, for example, their clients or their knowledge because it is competitive. Which may sort of intensify the use of exclusionary power within this field. And Sandström illustrates this point where she has a really interesting example where she points out how live sound engineers that she worked with mobilized the idea that women lacked the upper body strength to carry speakers, and so they weren't suitable for internships or entry-level jobs in live sound. And she exposed how actually what they were doing with that stereotype was sort of neutralizing potential competition within their field of work. So what can we do about this? There are already some very highly successful and active initiatives looking to promote diversity and inclusion within audio. So, for example, from the side of education, organizations such as Sound Girls or Women's Audio Mission or Audio Girl Africa often focus on creating opportunities for audio students. For example, low-stakes job opportunities where they have the space to make a mistake and learn that way. Or providing mentorship. There's been a lot of focus on role models within audio. So they'll put out articles about different women sound engineers, for example. And then in terms of theoretical work, there's sound studies scholars, musicology scholars, audio scholars who are unpacking the relationship between sound, technology, gender, and power. A very local example would be the Sonic Cyberfeminisms project, which is based out of Goldsmiths in London. Another important type of work is network building. So one thing that often gets moved about is this idea that it's very difficult to find women to work on certain jobs. So that it's difficult to find women audio engineers, it's difficult to find women producers. And projects like, for example, the EQL directory, which is a collaboration between Sound Girls and Spotify, are oriented towards addressing this issue. I also just found out about filmtonfrauen.de, which is a directory of women working in film sound in Germany. There's also lots of more local examples. For example, the Montreal Women DJs, Musicians and Audio Professionals Google document, which circulates in Montreal, which is like a big community managed Google document with names and contact info for women working in sound in various capacities. And people will use these resources to find or for example with the Montreal Women DJs directory, they'll use it to find like a DJ or another band to play on their bill or a producer to work with. And it's like that kind of thing can be very active and positive. Groups like Discwomen may be primarily oriented towards DJs and electronic musicians, but they can also often provide valuable resources. So these groups are working to create diversity by promoting visibility, as well as facilitating spaces that promote inclusivity by allowing individuals' unique experiences to be valued while they also feel part of a professional environment. Beyond these tactics, another really important element is reducing systematic setbacks and experiences of discrimination that underrepresented groups experience within audio. So, and in order to do this from an organizational standpoint, so for example from the AES's standpoint, it's really important to have clear and comprehensive data on what those experiences are. So, I mean, besides being useful or interesting in and of itself, having data on the topic of experiences of discrimination is useful for smoothing out any conflicts around the importance of diversity and inclusion work within an industry. So, for example, in professional organizations, so there was this research by this group by Barak from 1999 and Cundiff from 2009, I actually don't have this up here, where they were looking at significant differences in perceptions of diversity and discrimination within professional organizations across lines of gender, race, and age. And they found basically what you would expect, which is that older white men perceive systematically less discrimination within professional organizations and see less of a need for diversity and inclusion work just as a whole within the world that they were looking at. So this makes it even more important to have clear and legible data that can be referred to when talking about this stuff. I mean, also just from like an awareness building perspective. So, so reducing experiences of discrimination is also a place where I think there's a lot of room for sort of personal work to come into play and for individual actions to make a difference. So by examining our own assumptions about who an audio engineer is, what they look like, how they act, we can work on this issue from the ground up and look at the experience and make the experiences of our peers more positive within our industry. By examining our own actions and acting accordingly. So I think that's, I mean, I think it's like a place where there's like a lot of room for sort of positive motion. So in terms of collecting data, I'd like to invite you to participate in an ongoing large-scale survey project. Probably a lot of you have already received it in your inbox from the AES on their newsletter. And this survey is designed to investigate experiences of discrimination in one area of audio, so audio in the studio for music. It has two parts. The first part is a demographic portion, and the second portion looking at experiences of microaggressions, which is a really scary sounding word, but all it means is indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination. This study is being led by recording producer Dr. Amandine Prat and cultural sociologist Dr. Athena Alafros, so they're my colleagues at the University of Lethbridge. And it's in partnership with the AES's Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and it's supported by SSHRC, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. And with this study, we're interested in, first of all, answering this question of demographics, so looking at demographics within and outside of the AES, and then also investigating the general culture of working in audio for music, studio sound for music, and how experiences of discrimination correlate with other factors such as, for example, age, level of ability, race, gender, sexual orientation. By collecting this data, we'll at least be able to fill one little part of this demographic gap. It's very specific, and it's also quite general. It's like super specific in terms of like who we're including in that survey. Like, for example, I wouldn't necessarily fill it out because I'm a front of house engineer. But it's also quite general in the sense that it asks very general demographic questions. Because it will also be sent to producers and engineers outside of the AES, it also has the potential to inform the AES on the question of like what is going on with the 840 women in the AES versus the 4,900 women in Sound Girls. What are the what are people's reasons for not joining, and what exactly is going on? So the survey is being conducted until the 20th of December. We have around 600 responses so far, and we're really hoping to get to 1,000 so that we have enough statistical significance to do stuff with it. Even if you do not personally feel that you've experienced discrimination in the studio, in your studio work, we still would love to get your responses. All data is good data. And yeah. I feel like I've talked really fast for 45 minutes. I'd like to thank the volunteer translators who helped with the survey. It's been translated into 20 different languages, which is great. So those are the translators. And we have time for questions and discussion. I feel like the previous times I've given this talk, it was a bit informal. So I'm like, everyone's like sitting here. So questions.
Can we give a round of applause, please?
Yeah.
Have got questions?
Not a question, a comment.
Got a comment? 1 second.
Hello, I'm Jeff Hill. I'm very interested in this, not directly, because it doesn't affect me. I'm an old guy, but my daughter's now 15 and just trying to go through the process of working out where she wants to go and what she wants to do, etc. So that's part of the reason I'm here tonight, to get some different views. I think the big thing that you haven't addressed there is, why is it so few people in society are interested in anything to do with engineering, with doing things? And that is the big question behind everything. You know, the term audio engineer means, to at least to some extent, that you're constructing something, whether it be a physical thing, whether it be a virtual or whatever. But that's the big question I think needs answering.
I think that's a really good comment, for sure. I feel like, I think it does directly relate to this stuff in the sense that I think one of maybe the possible reasons would be that people don't feel empowered to just like go and build something or to sort of experiment with technology because it seems intimidating, and that's certainly a gendered thing, but I think it's also a thing in general. Yeah. Also, if people have direct responses to one another, that's also great. I feel like probably you all have as many answers as I do. Yeah.
We have some people furiously typing
God.
to get us questions from Wolverhampton and Leeds Beckett, so hopefully one of those will be popping through any minute. Anyone else have any questions? Or comments? Conversation?
I presented a lot of data. If people want me to go back and bring it up again to look at, feel free to ask.
Yeah, thanks. I was wondering if you had any more kind of intuitive thoughts about, the statistic about 6% of music students being...
Which one is that?
Yeah, it's coming somewhere.
I'm looking for it. Where is it?
Yeah, it was that one.
I'm not sure which one it is.
This one.
This one. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, do you have any intuition of what is the difference between music and music technology that makes music technology more, relatively more representative?
I feel like I'm not the right person to answer that question because I didn't do this work myself. I guess I feel like one possible answer would be that a lot of kids grow up with a computer at this point, and then not every kid grows up with a sort of acoustic instrument. I wonder if that might play into it. So maybe it's like an exposure thing. But I feel like I'm actually not the right person to answer it. Yeah.
Okay, we have a comment from Wolverhampton University. The targeting audience, as well as the people who are marketing audio software and hardware, is problematic as well. Doors, for example, are advertised by white males, for example.
If you go back and look at the advertising for the NS10 monitors, the classic white cone monitors, the really early advertising from that is like a really funny, perfect example where it's like there's two main posters that I'm thinking of. One of them is a picture of a shirtless, ripped guy being like, this small but powerful is how it's advertised. And then the other one is like a sexy woman holding an NS10. So it's just like exactly that. It's like the marketing does create that atmosphere. Yeah, I don't think it has to be that way. But I guess that's what sells.
This is sort of related to that a bit. I was interested when you were talking about the more sort of independent groups that are working within sort of gender diversity in audio and sort of organizing around that.
Mm-hmm.
And you suggested that some of them were working within kind of visibility and increasing visibility of women and minorities in audio. And I wondered if you thought that was a big part of, or at least a part of one of the solutions to this sort of broader lack of diversity there. And also if there's potential for this idea of visibility to actually be focused on too much at the expense of sort of really sort of core and material kind of resources and things like that as well.
I definitely think so. I mean, I feel it on both accounts where I'm like, okay, for young people being like, okay, what are my options in terms of my career? It's awesome to have like well-known women producers like on like visible. And then also I think it can be a really great source of like reassurance. Like if you're working, for example, you go into your first audio job and you're working in an environment where no one looks like you, and then you like are able to like access the stories of people who have had similar experiences or you can identify with. But I also think that there has to be like not just work related to visibility. There also has to be, I think, work related to mentorship is one that I think is super key, especially in industry. And like sort of concrete payoffs for people to work with more diverse populations within their work, because I feel like the change isn't just going to happen sort of fluidly. People have to feel like a good, positive reason why they might choose to involve diverse groups in their organization, like within their business. And then there has to be support for people who do go into that. So I definitely agree on both counts. But it's like, I feel like it has to start somewhere. And visibility work is, in some ways, I think, easier to access than sort of concrete other kinds of support.
I have a comment on that one,
Mhm.
actually. May I? So I think on that, what's a solution kind of part of the talk, it is very important to have visibility, of course, because I mean, to even see a woman producer that you really identify with and be like, oh, this is my idol, that was just amazing, at least for me when it happened. But I feel that the most important thing is to create a safe environment where, like, girls from very young age, they can just touch equipment and break it and make mistakes without having to be perfect at all times, and just like feel comfortable with doing that, because I feel that, at least in my experience starting out, I wasn't allowed to make mistakes, because that would make me, not as competent as my male classmates or colleagues. So I think that this is far more important at this point, just from a very young age, just create this safe environment, have equipment out there. I would love to see more of that and help for more of that, basically. But
Totally. I feel like that's a place where projects like, for example, Rock Camp for Girls is a really well-known one, where it can actually be really awesome.
To that point, I think you're absolutely right, but I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier. The real problem is that I suspect that our society as a whole has got so frightened about making mistakes, but people aren't allowed to play anymore. And it's only by playing, by trying things, breaking them, finding out what doesn't work, that you can then go on to make something new. And maybe that's part of the thing there. Personally, I try not to create any discrimination, gender or of any other sort at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's doesn't address the whole problem.
I mean, I think you're maybe identifying there's like the positive, like the active thing, which is people should be able to experiment and learn how to tinker and play with audio gear or whatever kind of stuff they're interested in getting involved with. And then there's also the negative side, which is the discrimination side. So you really have to address both.
Okay, we've had loads of comments coming through from Wolverhampton and Leeds Becker to say thank you so much. It's very interesting data. It's been very well received.
Good.
Something's come through. Wondering if you could talk a little bit about the AES Diversity and Inclusivity Committees and their plans to act on this data.
I think I am not the right person to ask about that, unfortunately. I'm a pretty new member of the AES Diversity and Inclusion Committee. I'm also a student. And my particular role is that I'm interested in the data side of things. That's just from my own personal interests. I would really love to see action based on this data, but I don't think, I'm not the one who makes the decisions, but I really hope that there will be sort of an active response to the data from the AES. And I have confidence that there will be. There's been a lot of involvement in this project, and yeah.
Do you have any other questions? Any comments? Okay, well, I'm not seeing any more action coming through here, so I think that's all we've got time for the moment. If we could all thank Grace very much for her time.
Great. Thank you.